Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have an awesome guest with us. I'm excited for you guys to listen into her story today. Her name is Shaleem Dzon. She's been a registered nurse for over 2 decades and is the author of her memoir, Illumination, A Griever's Journey Through the Darkness. She is currently a grief counselor and shares an intimate account of her journey through profound sorrow and healing through her book. Shaleem knows grief all too well. She lost her husband Brad to cancer, her dog Digby, who passed of old age, and she was also faced with another horrific loss of her boyfriend Bentley, who suffered a fatal heart attack and died in her arms on a mountainside. Shaleem channels her grief and soul level contemplations into poetry, offering readers a heartfelt exploration of love, loss, and the resilience of the human spirit. And so today's podcast episode, I'm really excited to get you guys to listen to Shaleem and also hear her story. And we are going to talk a little bit about her books. I do have a copy of it with me. There's a powerful line about grief that we'll get into a little bit later. But without further ado, Shaleem, welcome to the podcast.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I've been listening to your other podcasts, and I've been growing and feeling like a sense of compatibility with every one of your speakers. So it's really an honor.
Well, thank you. And, I appreciate you saying that because the big part of my podcast is that showing people grief is not a one way, one track mind process. It's a very individualized personal experience of things, but it's through our storytelling of our grief journey and our healing journey that we take that we can learn from other people who go through similar circumstances and even not so similar circumstances to help us find our own way forward in the healing journey.
Absolutely. The human story is just so incredibly potent. And yeah, no two stories are the same. I feel like grief is kind of like a snowflake. Like they're all different, but we know it's all grief when it has a certain shape. And I've experienced that from your podcast.
Yeah, and I also want to say I'm really excited to talk to somebody who has lived out in my neck of the woods in the PNW, and also shares an avid fan of mountain biking as well. I absolutely love that.
Thank you. Yeah, my heart is out there. I love that part of the world. Obviously, I moved halfway across the country and live in the Midwest now. I live in Northwest Arkansas, but my folks are still out there, and it's just such a beautiful place.
Well, I hope you come back to visit one day.
I will. We'll definitely get together.
Yeah. So, Shaleem, I want to start the podcast off by giving our listeners a chance to hear your story from you. So, I'd love to have you share a little bit about your losses. I know you've been through some very hard grief challenges. I know I went through losing somebody to cancer as well. That's its own journey and its own course, and as well as losing a pet. But I know losing your boyfriend Bentley on the mountainside, when you shared that with me, that was so powerful in so many ways because I know when you're on top of a mountain, help is not easy to get to. And there's a real place of feeling helpless in those moments. So I wanted you to share with listeners a little bit about your grief stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm honored to. So my husband died of cancer when he was 48 years old and I was 45. And we had only been married 1 year. So at our 1 year anniversary, we went in and faced the hardest kind of oncology appointment anybody can face. He had a 0% chance of survival, and there was nothing they could offer him. So he had been a survivor of childhood cancer. He had lymphoma when he was in seventh grade and again in 11th grade. So it was a byproduct of all the chemo and radiation that he'd gotten 30 years prior that caused the cancer that killed him. And yeah, there's just no easy way to face a day like that or a diagnosis like that. And we faced it together, and we did it without hospice, which is also not the easy way. And he died at home in our bed, and I grew so much as a person by going through that experience with him. But my heart shattered. when Brad died. And so I wrote my first poem the night that he died. I remember sitting by the fire. It was the biggest snowstorm in the history of Portland. And that was why hospice didn't come in. We had hospice ordered. The doctor came and did a house visit and realized how close we were, but the whole city shut down. So that just was not how it was meant to be. It was meant to be very intimate. And I wrote that first poem because I knew I wouldn't be able to speak at his memorial. I just cried the whole way through. But I organized all the speakers, and we had a beautiful memorial, and we filled the chapel, and there was not a dry eye in the house. And then I went on to continue to write poetry as I processed this tremendous change that had happened in my life. This grief was like eclipsing. It was a tidal wave, and I think it's often hard to find words to encapsulate those experiences that just they feel like they bring you to your knees. And so poetry helped me. And I hadn't been a poet before that, but I just wrote for myself, honestly. I wasn't writing for anybody else, but I wrote through that grief for about a year and a half until I went and scattered my husband's ashes from this high mountain place on our favorite mountain there in Oregon. And that was his deathbed wish, was that I scattered his ashes up at Illumination Rock, which is a ski mountaineering journey to get to. And it's a long ski down. It's a long hike up. And then he said, when our dog Digby dies, you can scatter his ashes there too. And little did I know I was going to move halfway across the country 6 years later when my beloved Digby died. And gosh, I think for people who have been through grief, they realize that we need something. You can look back later and say, wow, that really helped me to get through that tremendously hard time. And for me, it was my dog Digby. He saved my life. He became my best friend. And I'm sure a lot of dog owners and lovers would say the same thing, but gosh, he was the best dog in the world. So, yeah, fast forward 6 years, and the day that Digby died was the most alone, honestly, that I've ever felt. I was really dreading that day and hoping and praying, honestly, that I would have somebody to lean into because I knew how much that my heart would hurt. But I faced that day alone as well. And I just come to realize that sometimes we have to face the things that we most fear, and that's just life. But very shortly after that, I met a great man, Bentley. And one of our very first conversations, we met on a ski trip, and one of our very first conversations was around this journey I was about to take to back out to Oregon with my dog's ashes. And that's why I was skiing, because I knew I needed to get in shape again and get my ski legs back under me to undertake this mission. And I had done my husband's ashes by myself. That was a solo journey. And up until that point, that was the second hardest day of my life. So it's an arduous thing to let your loved one's ashes go. And it was just a physically arduous experience as well as emotionally. So Bentley and I started talking about this trip I was going to take, and he said, "I'm all in. The only thing we have to do is stop and see my buddy Jim, who's dying of brain cancer on the way." And so we loaded up my truck and drove and saw Jim, and he was in Arizona, and stayed some time there with him and his wife. And he was still walking and talking, so he was close, but we knew we had time to go up and do my heart journey to Illumination Rock. And so unfortunately, Bentley suffered a fatal cardiac arrest high on that mountain and died that day. And I came down that mountain burdened with a new grief. That was the hardest day of my life. I hadn't known Bentley and been in love with him that long, but we fell in love. We absolutely did, and in the time that we had, it was magical. Um, yeah, so hard to describe the incidents of that day, but we were on a very steep slope. We had basically made it to altitude. We were hiking up in the snow creating a boot pack up the skiers route, or the actually the climbers route up Mount Hood. And then you get to the point where it's so steep you would need to have crampons and an ice axe. And at that point, you put your skis on and traverse over to this beautiful place up on the mountain called Illumination Rock. And that was right when he fell to his knees and died very, very quickly. I had no idea actually a man that strong could die that quickly. And there we were, staring at Illumination Rock, and his soul had, taken flight. And I came down that mountain. It was as you can imagine, it was quite an ordeal that day to get the people gathered that it took to get him off the mountain, and all of that. But I went back to writing. At this point, I was familiar with grief, and I knew I had tools in my toolbox this time, and I knew what it was going to take to process this new grief and engage with life in a meaningful way again, and these things that are sort of goal points on our grief journeys. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew it wasn't going to be fast or easy, and that there's really no end point, but we have these turning points and milestones along the way. So I went and slept in the back of my truck in wild places out there in Oregon and Idaho, and couldn't be around people. I needed to just be by myself and be in wild nature, and turn to my writing again, and wrote, the majority actually of my book came out of that time period. And then I got the call from Bentley's best friend that his wife, that he was close and they wanted me there. So I drove back, and I was one of three people to support when Bentley's best friend Jim passed away, and Jim died on Bentley's birthday. So yeah, Bentley was 53, and his best friend Jim was 54. So in a very short period of time, yeah, I was close to two strong, powerful forces of a man who left this earth very quickly. And obviously he wasn't my person to love, but it was still another face of grief to experience, and just a reminder of, wow, we never know how much time we have. I think that's one of the things we really come away from when we experience things like that, people dying young, unexpectedly, that life is sacred, and each breath, each day is so sacred.
Well, Shaleem, I appreciate you sharing your grief story with us because I can't imagine the insurmountable amount of grief you face in such a short period of time. And I can't help but feel that Illumination Rock has some kind of spiritual connection with you going through all these losses because somehow they all led you to that one place at each point. And
It
have you
was a
ever
spect Yeah, it was a beautiful place for him to die. I mean, it just what a dramatic and spectacular, outing he had. But absolutely, all the love I had for my husband, that was my first time to go back to the place I'd scattered his ashes. All the love I had for my dog, I had his ashes in my backpack, and I was fulfilling this deathbed wish. And then, yeah, to have Bentley die up there too, it was truly unbelievable. I mean, I was just in shock and awe that this was the trajectory that my life was taking. I really, it just seemed unfathomable to me. But in hindsight, what a beautiful place. Bentley was certainly on a hero's mission. He died in a spectacularly beautiful place in the arms of the woman who loved him and who he loved back. So,
I
yeah.
just I can't help but feel like that's just a great way to go out in many ways. Just a powerful, powerful way to be in that kind of environment with the person you love in that moment. I mean, I just don't think you could really ask for a better way on that. So I hope I'm not out of line by saying that, but it's just a beautiful story that you shared.
Absolutely, yeah. And I may even share one of my writings from my book about somebody who actually helped that I met out in the backcountry when I was sleeping in my truck. That kind of helped me to see it that way, and that did help. I mean, I think we need to find some light in the darkness with grief. It didn't help me figure out like why was this how I had to live now with this, tragedy, and there was a lot of I'm going to say trauma involved to having him, die right there. It was grief and trauma combined. But I kept going back to saying Bentley had a good death. I mean, he died too young, but that's a great death. And there was some comfort there.
Well, I think it's also hard, when you talked about your husband you were with and going through cancer. And I think that's something that, I always pray people do not have to go through that because I went through something similar to you with my grandfather where the diagnosis was this is terminal and we can try to do chemo, but it's gonna come back. It's not going away. And when you're in that place, when you hear that news with the doctor, I mean, your mind almost like snaps into this empty, numb feeling of, I don't even know how to respond right now because I can't change this. It's inevitable. I'm not ready for this. Like you just have all these thoughts going through your head. How did you guys, navigate that path in your own journey? And also, how did you guys make the most of that time you had after hearing a diagnosis like that? It's just to me, it's one of the worst feelings you can ever have a doctor say, there's no treatment, there's nothing we can do. This is just how it's going to be. And that's just not, it's hard to accept that, is where I'm going with that.
It's such a great question. And, I have to say that you're right. The grief starts at that moment, but you don't want to let it ruin the time that you have. So even though there's anger and numbness and, such sadness and all the rest, you're like, but this time is just so precious. And yeah, it's the worst feeling in the world watching somebody that you love and cherish more than anybody else on the planet, like die in front of you. I mean, each day getting, all the progressing through the stages of, yeah, getting thinner and as you stop eating and drinking and eventually they stop talking and just you watch them waste away to a bag of bones, he didn't even look at all like himself by the time he went. And we see this on like movies where you've got a tough guy that they're going to torture and then they bring the wife in, right, or they bring the kid in and they're like, okay, we'll tell you anything. So I mean, I think that lets us know like we would rather take the pain than watch somebody that we love suffer. And so it's a uniquely hard thing to have to shoulder watching somebody that I would have died for him. So I loved him so much. I definitely would have switched places, and yet that wasn't a choice. So I will say about Brad that he was an optimist by nature. I'm not. I'm still learning about optimism, and I hear his voice in my head, but he was an optimist, and he didn't want to hear, even though we knew, he didn't want to hear, this is your last birthday, this is our last Christmas, this is the last New Year's. He didn't want to be treated differently. I mean, I actually, I kept working after that. I kept going to work until the day came that he was really too sick to be left at home alone. And and then I put in my notice. So, because he just wanted things to feel normal for as long as possible. And so, what I say is, if the person who's dying is the captain of the ship, they get to call the shots. They get to make the rules. And so if he wanted things to feel normal for as long as possible and didn't want to focus on the sad parts, then that's what we did. Was that easy for me? Not so much, in some ways, because we really didn't say goodbye until he had lost the capacity to speak. So our goodbye was incredibly intimate. I'm sure similar, maybe Chris, to what your goodbye was, because I know that your baby died and you didn't get to have a verbal conversation either. But I think sometimes those nonverbal goodbyes are more poignant. I just put my head up next to his head and we just were breathing together and we just knew that this was goodbye, the one that we never spoke. And we knew that this was the I love you forever. And so, yeah. And I wrote a poem about that too, which is Let Love Show the Way. And it basically is like, God, how do I face this? I asked my brain, I asked my heart, I asked my bones, I asked all these parts of myself, and I asked God, like, how do I do this? How do I do this now? And, the answer in the poem is always let love show the way and save your sorrow, save your grief, save it all for another day. And so I really truly believe that, like, when they're gone, go fully surrender to the grief. But every single moment they're there, every breath, every heartbeat is so precious.
I love what you said about that because when you do go through grief like that, it's so hard, it's so heavy, and it's so consuming. When you mentioned that Bentley died in your arms, I watched my grandfather die in my arms from cancer, and I don't wish that upon anybody. I'm sorry you had to go through that because it's
Well,
so
twice. Yeah. I mean, my
twice.
husband also. Yeah. Right. Yeah. He also died in
Yeah,
my
going through
arms, of
that
course.
twice. And
Yeah.
that's really, really heavy because I think that, what I took away from that experience is we're not only seeing our own mortality of where we are going to be at some point in life, but we just lost the one that we love. We lost the one that we were so close to that was everything for us. And now we're left in a very short, permanent moment that this is all gone. And now it's really this place of how do I pick myself up from this? Number one, how do I navigate the grief that's going to come with this and trauma in that instance too, by the way. And that's why I do this podcast in many ways, because people don't understand that when you go through an experience like that, you're not going to wake up the next day and say, okay, I'm fine, life goes on, or you're going to be able to get over it and move on. Like I hear a lot in the grief space. It doesn't work that way. Um, there's some people that are capable of doing that in the short term, and I bless them for that. But grief will always come back and haunt you in the most inopportune moments. And to be able to hold space for that when it happens and giving yourself permission to feel and to grieve, like you said about surrender, I think that's the most beautiful thing you could ever tell somebody who is going through grief or feeling stuck in grief is to surrender to that feeling. Allow yourself to feel those emotions.
100%. I mean, one of the hardest parts was coming home for me. I dreaded coming home because I had spent, just time like sleeping out the back of my truck and processing my grief. But I just, you feel so different. Like I haven't been to war, but I imagine it's something similar to what, soldiers feel like when they come back from war. They have gone through a life-changing experience, right? And yet the people back home, they have no idea what you just went through. They can't really fathom it, even if they try. And just this sense of like that somebody would expect me to be it's another poem that's I wrote around that theme of be the same as yesterday. Like when we go through these life altering experience, we are not going to be the same as we were before. And yeah, you can, I felt so, it was so hard to even understand myself, right? Comprehend myself and everything that I was going through that it was like, how is anybody else going to understand or comprehend this? Like, it just seemed unfathomable that they could because I was just grasping, to try to figure out who am I now? And yes, exactly. Picking up all the pieces and, moving on with life now with this as part of our story.
Well, that brings me to a good place that we talked about before we recorded today. And I've got Shaleem's book with me. I don't know if you guys can see it on Zoom. She wrote a poem it's number 22. And I thought this line was really powerful, but she talked about how grief did all the talking, which really goes unsaid. Silence listened with his heart that grief's true love was never dead. I found that line so powerful when I read that because grief does do all the talking for you. Even in those moments of silence, even when you are feeling numb or you just don't even know what to say or your mind is completely checked out and just empty, restless land. Grief does all this talking for us. It tells us how we feel, what we think, what we're lacking, what we're missing, what we wish could have happened, or if we had more time, or if we could have done something different. Grief is such a loud communicator in these moments that almost is like another person attaching to us as we walk through this healing journey.
Absolutely, yeah. That poem was called Silence and Grief, and it talks it's the metaphor of silence and grief each being personified, right? And being on this journey together. And honestly, for grief, it was a relief to have silence along because silence never said the wrong words, right? Which I think we all encounter that people don't want to just stay silent, and I wouldn't encourage them to. I think try, even if you say the wrong thing, like it's still you don't want to be silent, but that there's a lot of silence that comes along with grief. You're just, and at times for me there was a comfort in just this steady solitude and silence that I personally went to. And yeah, grief is doing all the talking in there. Like you even wonder, where am I in the middle of all this? Like, especially as a poet, you wonder like who's doing the writing and who's the audience, I mean, it's this sort of like disassociated state. And, it's like, yeah, grief is doing the writing and grief is, most likely the audience too.
So I want to ask you something because I used to, when I went through grief in my 20s a lot with jobs and all sorts of things, my biggest thing was to run out into nature, somewhere preferably where the cell phone did not have any service. I just wanted to be with nature and God and myself.
Mm.
What was that like for you when you just jumped in your truck and just took off and went into the wilderness? What was that? What were those feelings you had being out there alone with yourself and with nature? How did that help you as you went through your grief process?
Yeah, I think, we're dealing with some basic fight or flight stuff there, and there's nobody to fight. We can't beat that foe of death. And so flight was yeah, and big, wild, beautiful nature. I think there's something so powerful about the sound of the wind in a tall strand of trees, or I love to camp next to rivers, and just to have that river song. It's a very just brings us back to these sort of basic elements of who we are as humans on this earth, and the that felt like companionship to me to have nature, and so it didn't feel quite so alone. Obviously I wasn't fully prepared for something like that. It wasn't the plan. So I met people sporadically along the way who, worried about my well-being out there. Obviously, it's like I had a firearm or any way to protect myself. But there were times for sure that I felt a little spooked when you hear noises at night and there's, you're in the middle of nowhere and there's nobody else around. But I think when you're that close to death, sometimes also like you're not afraid to die. And so it wasn't a paralyzing fear, there's again, we're back to that word surrender, but when my day comes and we all get to have our own idea about like, is death predestined or is this my day or not? But I'll share a story of I had a stepbrother who died back in 2011 and he was young. He was 24 and it was a tragic death. And yeah, and I think you go through all those things like, what if something would have been different that day and he wouldn't have died? And I went and did a hike out. I was living in Oregon at the time in the Columbia River Gorge, and so it's this like 3,000 foot, cliff faces that go down to the gorge, and I hiked up, and I could see there was a little footpath that went out to this rock, and I went and sat on that rock, and I leaned my back on the cliff wall because it was a tiny bit slanted forward, and gosh, one stumble and you would fall to your death, right? And I sat there and I meditated and I was really looking for peace with my stepbrother Andrew's death. And when I opened my eyes, I looked and beside me there's this rock that is professionally carved there with a woman's name and it has two dates, which I can only imagine were her birth date and her death date. Now I don't know if she suicided off that rock, if she tripped and stumbled, maybe that's where her ashes were scattered, who knows, but that's where her rock was. And because I had just come out of this deep meditation, my mythology came to me about death. And so this is mine, and it has helped me that maybe we all have a little rock like that carved in heaven that has two dates on it. And those are our dates. And when your day to die comes, it's your day to die. And that, that helps, I think, with acceptance. Like, okay, it was their day to die. And that was something actually spoken about with Bentley because his son had committed suicide the year before I met him, and his good friend Jim was about to die, and so we talked about this, meditation I had and my concept with that, and he very much agreed with it. Like, yeah, when it's your day, it's your day, and so I think that gave me comfort. Like, I don't know when my day is going to come, and I think I'm glad I don't, but yeah,
Well,
I think that
well,
that
I mean,
helped.
if we all knew what day we were gonna die, I mean, some of us might not even do anything. Others of us would do everything. And it would really kind of take away the aspect of life to just live and to just be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a funeral poem, but that one called Dash. And, it talks about our life is lived in that dash between those two dates. And it is a really great poem and it's very true. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I love that you went out into nature and with seclusion. I love that you did that because something I found very healing going out into nature is that, like you mentioned, being out in the woods by yourself, all of a sudden your senses get very heightened. And I think that when you're in the city, I call it the city jungle. I'm not a city person, but you've got so many noises and sounds going off. There's so many things moving around. It's just there's total chaos going on. And when you go out into nature, out in the woods, and I usually go on back trails people don't go on anymore, all of a sudden everything quiets down a lot, and you can hear the smallest thing, bugs or crickets, or you can hear a deer 5 miles away trampling on something. And it's almost like this new sensory of things comes to you. And somehow, in the moment of that, by the way, when this thing quiets down from all that distraction, you can actually hear your thoughts. You can actually hear how you feel without those disturbances.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so turbulent sometimes when you go through trauma and grief, that's sudden. That's exactly right, Chris, to go to a place where you can just let all of that settle down and start to feel some peace again and just hear yourself think exactly and figure out what it is that you are feeling. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you as we get into the next phase of the podcast here, what was that healing journey like after going through this many losses? Because losing your husband to cancer the way you did, that's a very rough way to go through grief, and that's very traumatic, by the way, very traumatic. Losing a pet, I this is one I came across
Oh,
last year. Everybody, said to me, I've heard phrases, oh, it's a rabbit, oh, it's a dog. And I'm going, like, guys, pets are in our lives for somewhere between 5 and 15 years sometimes. It's not just an animal, it's part of our life, it's part of our routine. And oftentimes, these animals are there to comfort us in the worst moments when maybe we don't have somebody there that's willing to listen or the world just isn't being kind. But our dog is going to be there for us, always going to be there. And going through losing Bentley after that and the way that you did. Those are such big losses that happened back to back. What was healing like for you from there? Because I know it's not always a linear journey I try to share with people. Tell me a little bit about that healing journey and where that led you.
absolutely. I mean, I think that we start to ask some really big questions when we're faced with something like that. Like what, for me anyway, like what is the purpose of life? Like, like what is the meaning of all of this when there's, when you can fall in love and then they're gone, and now the rest of your life without them and just, the suffering that you look around and realize other people go through as well. And so I think um obviously a deep dive into some deeper spiritual thinking and leaning into your faith, leaning into God. Obviously, nature always played a really big role for me. And in hindsight, I think you can look back and realize that there are sort of turning points on the journey where you start to realize you're going to be okay. And for me, it was my dog, Digby. He was such a joyful guy and a total playful black lab knucklehead. And it was probably about 7 or 8 months after my husband had died. I don't think I smiled. I mean, I think that's part of what I personally really missed after Brad died. It wasn't that I just missed him and like hearing his voice in the other room or just knowing, all of those hopes and dreams and plans for the future and all that stuff. I missed me being with him. I missed being a happy, joyful person who was in love, because now I was really in a miserable state. Like, I didn't like my own company. I was so sad. I cried so much. It was just, I didn't know a human could cry that much. And anyway, that turning point came on a summer day where Digby was like jumping off of a dock to get his ball in the water, and then he had to swim all the way to shore and run back all the way to dock. And we were at a public lake in the Seattle area, and everybody was happy and joyful and smiling. And I cracked a smile. And I was like, this is the first time that I have smiled in 7 or 8 months, and I knew I was going to be okay when I could smile again. And so after Bentley died, it was quicker. It was quicker that I smiled. He had bought me some grocery store flowers on our road trip out there because he knew I love flowers, and we had them in a water bottle, in the water bottle holder in the truck. And those grocery store flowers lived a lot longer than he did. So I had those with me on my journey, and I would add beautiful wildflowers to the bouquet because everything was blooming in Idaho and Oregon at that time. And the day that I finally let that bouquet go, I had it out on a picnic table, and by now I was on my way back down to Arizona to see Bentley's best friend die. And a big wind had blown the water bottle over and had spilled because I had it on a picnic table that morning. And I knew I was in the middle of nowhere in like the Great Basin of Nevada, and it was all desert there and cactuses. And I just knew it was time to let those flowers go. And when I kind of hiked out and found a beautiful place and put them in a bush, and I smiled. And it was kind of that was a turning point moment because I knew by then, like, if you can smile, even if it's a small smile. This one was an unwitnessed smile. This was just me in the middle of nowhere, but just remembering the flowers and grateful for the journey, and just, yeah, leaving that beautiful place. I smiled and I thought, I'm going to be okay. This is hard, but I'm going to be okay. And so I think looking for those moments of just knowing that you're going to be okay. And for everybody, it would be something different. Obviously, maybe you weren't having to face it alone, and maybe you had somebody there to, give you a hug and just, help you feel like it's going to be okay. Maybe it's that pet, nature, but there's always something there. And I think that that's what I learned. Even if some of us feel very like alone, there's always something there, and we just have to find it. Sometimes it's just the way the light is coming through the trees, or it catches a speck of dust. Like, these are things that I've written about in my poetry, that we have to change the lenses of how we look at our lives and look at world. And I know a lot of grief people have said it. You got to find one small joy every day. That was definitely something that I attributed to right after Brad died. Like, that a hot shower, a cup of coffee, clean sheets. Like, that's one of my small joys. Like when you wash your sheets and clean them once a week, on the bed. So that, yeah, you don't want to get caught up in feeling sorry for yourself, or, in pity, just because you're going through something really hard. So gratitude, small joys, yeah, and confirming that you're going to be okay.
I really appreciate that you shared when you first smiled after grief, because after losing my kid, that took a long time to get there, very long time. And I think that a lot of us, when we go through grief, something you said, we're going to be okay. In the thick throes of grief and trauma, as you and I have experienced, we're looking. So if somebody was to say that to us the minute after that happened, we would look at them like, "You're crazy. This isn't going to work." Um, and I can definitely
Mm,
say that, one of my phrases I use with coaching clients a lot is, "It's okay that you're not okay today. I want you to give yourself permission to be where you are right now in your journey. You don't have to be here or here. You can be right here." And I think when you give yourself that permission, that's where you can eventually get to that place you talked about of knowing that you're going to be okay, because you remove that expectation people put on you or how you're supposed to do things, and just really start to discover your own path through grief and healing. And that's where you can start to get to that place of saying, you know what, I'm going to be okay, but this is going to take a little bit of work for me, and this is going to be a little bit different of a path or a little bit different of a journey than I was expecting, and that's okay. Um, what are your thoughts
yeah.
on?
And actually, I even think it's like redefining okay, because at some point you get to the point where you're like, I can't almost think of no circumstance, even if I was dying, even, that I wouldn't be okay. Like you find this something inside, that eternal soul, right? That that's just okay no matter what, right? So I think it's fine. Yeah, not maybe you've sort of changed the definition of okay by the time it's coming from inside your own head. Yeah.
Well, I try to avoid phrases like okay and normal and grief because I asked myself at some point when somebody said getting back to normal to me, I was like, what does normal even mean? How do we even define what normal is? Because normal could be when Bentley was in your life. Normal could be when Digby was in
Mhm.
your life. Normal could be when your husband was in your life. But now that's gone. And so that normal doesn't exist anymore. It was normal at a certain point, but now we have a new normal. And I
Totally.
always like to tell people that that phrase normal, I think, washes out the meaning of your life and what you've gone through. So I think finding acceptance is what I like to say is accepting where you are today and not trying to normalize it, but just accept where you are and be the observer of where your path is taking you.
That I think that's probably the most poignant word that we can use on our grief journeys is just acceptance and then maybe adapting. Adapt, those are the two A's, you know. And yeah, if we can, yeah, acceptance is that was not easy though either. Like, you know, it's I I saw in myself, you know, times that I thought, well, yes, of course I've accepted that they're dead, you know, and I've done the funeral and I've accepted it, but you know, I was still angry, right? I was angry for a
Yeah.
long time after Brad died. So I've come to realize now, like, if you're still angry, you haven't fully accepted yet, because your acceptance has to be in a place where you're not like bitter or angry or jealous of other people that didn't go through all that. Then you still have acceptance work to do. So that's like, those are all litmus tests for you know, how far you've come on your acceptance and like the work we still have to do. And yeah, it's a forever thing.
Yeah, I've always told people acceptance, and that's why I call myself an acceptance coach. I help people get to that place, and and you're right, it is not the easiest place to get to. I tell people that all the time. This is not going to be you wake up and say the words, I accept reality. That doesn't work like that. Acceptance is going through those motions of your grief. It's going through your trauma. It might mean revisiting that moment where we lost somebody 5,000 times before you get to that place. It might literally be that. And so, I've always said that acceptance means that we don't like it, we don't agree to it, but we just take it for exactly what it is, not what we think it is. And we know that it just means that we're going to stop denying reality. It means we're going to just fully say that I accept that life has changed. I accept they're no longer with me physically. Doesn't mean they're not there spiritually with me. But I now accept the fact that my life is going to be different. It's going to look different. I'm going to be different. And I give myself permission to figure out who the heck is 2.0 version of me as I start moving forward in this life.
100%. Totally agree.
So, Shaleem, I was going to ask you, when did you become a grief coach?
I became a grief counselor last year. So through I'm a registered nurse. So through that, through the American Academy of Health Practitioners, you can become a certified grief counselor. And I published my book last year, and yeah, did the coursework to become a certified grief counselor. So just all last year, and just you know have been building my business of grief counseling, which has been you know, an incredibly rewarding experience. I think one of the things I learned a ton actually by becoming a grief counselor. There was stuff that probably would have helped me along the way, you know. Some of it was just like that this is normal grief, right? I was like, okay, you know, it feels so extreme when you're in it and you realize like, okay, some of this stuff is actually normal and this is what's expected. And some of the languaging, you know, I learned some new words that I hadn't really used in my inner vocabulary before. And so it was actually a really good experience to just go through the coursework and then start talking to people about their grief too, and yeah, give them some guidance. So, and I've written two more books. I've got a children's book that's going to be published this year, and another one that'll be published next year. And I'm excited about that. So just to be like, yeah, all of us just to find our voice in the world of grief, and part of I realize like our processing grief and accepting grief is finding some purpose in it. And at first that's you're like, I don't want to find purpose in this tragedy. Like, I don't want this to even be real. But as we move along, if you can find some sense of purpose, whatever that is, and for some of us, it's helping others, and giving back to the grief community. So, but yeah, I'm excited. But my children's book, this is coming out. It teaches kids the word commemoration, which is a big word, and the main characters are a seagull and an elephant seal and a sea turtle and some friends they learn they meet along the way. So I'm very excited about that one. And then the one that we'll publish next year, it's about pet death, which is one of the ones that kids often go through first in life, and it's a raccoon who loses her pet ladybug.
Aw, I
Yeah.
I love that. I love that you're making a book for children because I think that, I remember going through losing family members when I was really little, and I did not understand. It just didn't make sense, and I couldn't comprehend it, and not, let alone my parents never really talked about it. And so, I love that you're making a book to help
Mm.
children understand that part of life from a young age perspective, and through the use of animals. I love that a lot. So I'm
Oh yeah.
excited for people to read this.
Yeah, I think that well, my other book is a lot of poetry, so that's kind of maybe a limited audience. But yeah, these kids' books I think will help adults as well. Adults have a hard time knowing what to say to kids, right? And I think almost anybody would read these books and kind of feel like they learned a little something. So yeah, I'm excited.
I love that for you. Well, Shaleem, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast today, sharing your
Thank
grief
you.
story and your healing journey. I think you shed light that healing is definitely not linear, but it's a journey. And I think that healing took you on some journeys and some places out into nature and out into the wilderness, to really reconnect with yourself and really discover what the purpose of grief was in your life, and to see you making the beautiful contributions in your life as you are through writing poetry, through your book Illuminations, and also with your new books that are coming out here soon. I just think that this puts you on a big mission to help people in a new way, understand a heavy topic of life. So I'm really, really grateful to have had you on the show today. And I want to wish you all the best on your new upcoming books and helping people through grief.
Thank you so much for having me. I've so enjoyed this. I'd love to end with just a poem that I would want to, close to the end of my book. This is poem 136, if we have just a minute. This one's
Hmm.
called A Kaleidoscope of Memory. And so it seems our lives are not defined by joy alone, but by magnitudes of loved ones lost, whose memories glow bright like specks of gold cast to the sky by winds are caught. We can hold our loves for a moment's golden splendor, but time will move that moment on. The mind a kaleidoscope of fragmented pieces of hopes and dreams and laughter songs. Yet, in that kaleidoscope of memory, sits heartbreak in the future lack. Though joy would bring the heart to glory, the loyal heart just wants them back.
Beautifully said. I love that.
Love is forever. We'll always love them.
We always will. That never
Yeah,
dies.
it
So,
never does.
Shalem, as I usually wrap up my podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. One of them is, if you were to run into somebody going through grief or maybe feel stuck in grief, what's one thing you would share with them to help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
Yeah, I mean, you got to feel it to heal it. You just do. There's no like avoiding it. There's no, we have to, like you said, as messy and hard as it is, like go into the wound and feel all those hard stuff. So, otherwise, yeah, grief will have its day. And, I mean, this concept of being stuck, I think people do know it when they're stuck. They can feel like I need to make movement here. And, I really like to point out to people like a diamond is created under a tremendous amount of heat and pressure, right? It's a lump of coal that turns into a diamond. The diamond is the hardest substance on the planet. The nucleuses are the closest packed that anything else on the that we know of, right? And so how do we take these really hard experiences and translate them in our own selves so that we become a diamond? We are a diamond in the rough and not just crumbling into, charcoal. And so just, encouraging the strength within people that this is an endurance, this isn't a fast thing, this is an endurance experience, and to believe that that's a worthy enough goal as we're coming through our trauma and our grief, that through these hardships, you are going to become like a diamond and a better version of yourself, and to believe that that's enough, that you're going to become kinder, more compassionate, more understanding of other people's grief experiences, and to guard ourselves against these bitterness, or just getting so caught up into the gloom and doom of what your life story was. And so I think that those are really, that's so important for anybody who's getting stuck, to just realize, like, find your purpose in the suffering, and becoming like a diamond is a purpose enough, right? Be be like that, because a diamond is shining. It's not just strong, it's clear and it's shining and it reflects the light. And one of my signature sayings from my book is this: perhaps after all, a broken heart is like a broken mirror with more places to reflect the light. And I believe that.
Mm.
We can feel our heart has just been shattered, but a broken mirror has all these different surfaces to reflect the light. And so if we can really embody that in ourselves and say, it's not my light. This light is coming from God, right? It's a higher light, but more surface area to reflect it with each broken piece.
That is beautifully said. And I love that you said we have to feel it to heal it, because that's something that people try to run from grief and push it under the carpet and move on and get over it and let go. But truthfully, you got to feel your grief. You got to go through it. The only way I've ever told people is through it and moving forward with it are the ways to handle grief and to get that meaning and purpose out of it. Like Shaleem just said, there is purpose in this grief. It doesn't have to be all tragedy. Yes, that's a part of it, but it's also going to make you a diamond, as she said, and you're going to become a
Mm.
better person because of it. So that will
Yeah.
show itself in time, by the way. That's not something that happens right away, but it will show it to you. It will show it to you on your journey in the right time when it's meant to be seen. So, Shaleem, thank you for sharing that. And then my last question I have for you: if people want to connect with you after listening to this podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, illuminationgriefcounseling.com is my website, and I've got poetry there, and my book there. My future books will be published there, and also information about the grief counseling. I'm also on social media. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, just under my name, Shaleem Dzon, and it's a unique name, but it's Shaleem Dzon Illumination Grief Counseling. So I bet you if you just Googled my name, my book would be one of the first things that pops up. Yeah, and that would take you to ways that you could find me. But illuminationgriefcounseling.com, that's the easiest way. And I encourage anybody, yeah, to reach out if any of this called to them.
Well, if you guys listening to the podcast today enjoyed Shaleem's story, just know that I'll have her links in the show notes when you guys get done listening to the episode. But I definitely recommend reaching out to her. Get a copy of her book, Illumination. It is a beautiful book. I have started reading it, and there's lots of good nuggets of wisdom in there if you were going through grief or loss. She has a beautiful way of helping you move through grief in a personalized journey. So, Shaleem, thank you again for being on today's episode.
Thank you so much for Chris for having me. I look forward to talking with you again.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Shaleem and I on today's episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Shaleem's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.